So I'm using Windy.App here. I found this to be a lot more reliable than Surfline for this region. And we have a fairly typical swell pattern coming in right now. So this will serve for a good example for where to surf in Morocco. And same thing with the winds, how to watch the winds so you know where to go, maybe a day or two in advance, possibly longer. So typically we're going to get northwest swells here coming into Morocco. As you can see here, this swell coming up, and looks like maybe by tomorrow morning it will be hitting Morocco here. So looks like they're going to be getting some decent waves here for a day or two, and then it's going to back off. And that's fairly typical. So the important thing to know here is that where to be when this swell hits. So let's go back here to today. Swell has not hit yet, and this is the main surf area. So if you're coming into Agadir, staying around Tagazout, which is what most people do, you'll see here that the swell is going to be hitting these outer areas up here much more, in the northern area much more. So when it's small, these are decent areas to go up to. You have City Koki up here. You need to watch for the wind there, but I will go over that next. And then down here, City Ifni and Mir left, also catching more swell. So you'll see these areas getting decent swell, but the Tagazout area not picking it up as much. However, when some decent swell does start coming in, you'll see that it will get big enough for these areas to break. And you're not going to see these perfect lines all the way in, but if you do see essentially red going to purple coming into this region like it is here, that's going to be enough to get these to break. And as you can see, City Koki, much more exposure. It's going to be too big for some of the breaks there. There are some decent ones that are sheltered here around this Lagrat area, but they can be a bit more fickle. So if you have a decent swell coming in, essentially this whole coastline's going to light up here. And if it's too big at the main areas here, like Anchor Point or Killers, which is just around the corner there, there are some places up this coast here, like Desert Point, which is quite well known and popular, should be easy enough for you to find, that will be a little bit smaller and still should be quite decent. Now, if it is smaller and you're looking for a bit more size, say after this backs off here a bit, then once you get up around this point here, then it starts catching more swell. So Boilers is another big spot around this area that catches quite a bit more. But you will see on Surfline that usually says it's flat, even though sometimes it can be overhead. And then this Beach Tamri here catches quite a bit because it's on this point over here. So that's a good area to go if it's looking small. And then City Koki, as you can see, catching a lot more. And then the southern area is catching a lot more. So you can just see this whole area here, this whole Agadir kind of bay cove area, just a lot more sheltered. So you need more swell for those breaks to get going. Now let's take a look at the winds. Generally, the winds are going to be more mellow in this area here. This is not exactly a typical pattern here, but more mellow in this area here. And then these areas are more exposed. The north and the south are more exposed. So while these areas get more swell, they're also more exposed to winds. So let's see if we have a pretty typical pattern today. No winds in the morning, and then in the afternoon, picking up. So this is not, I wouldn't say this is exactly typical. Usually, actually in the afternoon, the Tagazout area is okay too. So let's see if we can find a more typical pattern here. So this looks normal in the morning, not much wind. And then in the afternoon, we can see some wind starting to pick up in the north area here. That's pretty typical, probably in the south too, picking up a little bit more here. And then as the afternoon, as it gets later in the afternoon, more often you'll have even more winds up in this northern area. So let's see if we get the typical pattern here on one of these future days. Yeah, that looks pretty typical, where you can see winds up here, quite strong. Winds down in the Tagazout area, not as strong. So afternoon surf sessions up here in this area can be a challenge. Now this isn't showing it. Maybe we can find it on another day, but oftentimes actually you get a lot of offshore winds in this area here. So in the afternoon, it will pick up, but it can be strong offshore here, particularly in the fall and the middle of the winter. So we're not seeing that pattern at this time. Maybe this is a good example, but not quite hitting it, but you can often see strong offshore winds here. So you can see it's probably offshore winds or close to it at boilers, but oftentimes the wind direction is heading a little bit more towards the west, and this will be strong offshore winds. And oftentimes when that happens, you can have winds up in this area, but not so much down in this area. And then for the south, what you'll generally see is more winds in the afternoons here, but generally wind is not too big of an issue. Okay, yeah, there's a good, fairly typical wind pattern for the high level. You can see lighter winds up in the Agadir, Tagazout area, but much heavier in the north and south area. So if you are chasing those smaller swells, just be aware of the wind patterns like this, and you can use an app like this to help you look out the next couple days or a week or so to see what it's going to be like.